When Tick first saw the human, she was struck by how soft it looked. She had been born to the royal family of her world, one of the countless colonies of the Lick Imperium. Born to privilege. She had been perhaps 6 years old when the mad beast had been introduced to the Colosseum. She had wept when the poor, sweet creature had been led into the center, left unclothed, standing alone in the center of the sandy basin as 4 well-trained Lick warriors approached it. She had begged her father not to allow the creature to be hurt, but he had ordered her to watch. The atmosphere of Lick CXXVI was, like most worlds, anemic and thin for the Lick. Tick, who had grown up there on all of her life, was slightly used to it. The vast majority of the Lick spent at least some of their time on the orbital platforms hovering around the world, in the oxygen-rich atmosphere they preferred. Down here, on the sands, under the scorching binary sun, they were relatively slow. Still dangerous warriors, but not as quick as they could be. Tick had watched, her eyes wide, as the mad beast had swept through them like a desert sandstorm, ripping limbs from their sockets, fist cracking through chitin as though they were not a group of the most elite gladiators that her father had assembled for this exhibition. She watched as one of them drove a knife through the human's arm, only for it to pull it free, and go to bloody work on its assailant. The crowd howled with pleasure, and she felt sick. The mad beast's deathworlder physiology kept it going like that for 5 years of increasingly unfair battles. The accumulated wounds would have felled a Lick in 5 days, but it healed quickly, even without access to medical care, and kept fighting. "This is the nature of humans," murmured her father, his eyes narrowed, as they watched the last of the bodies be cleared. "The whole point of why I show this. They look soft. Gentle. But they are monsters. They come from a world of death, and they bring only death. Don't be fooled." She was 11 now. When her father died, she would be expected to take over his duties. He was in his 30s, a geriatric by this point, kept alive largely by advanced medical technology. When he died, she would be expected to engage in parthenogenesis, to continue the royal line, untainted by outside blood. She thought it a crude, foolish method, but she was a slave to the chains of tradition. It was how her people had maintained order for 10,000 years. Why try something new when something old had always worked? She watched as the humans' final battle commenced. 100 of the deadliest mercenaries that money and the promise of glory could buy. She covered her eyes as the human fought, slowing gradually. The sands were a multi-hued painting, splatters and sprays weaving an elaborate mural as the human fought. It was on its knees, one arm hanging limply at its side, but it still parried blow after blow from the trident, keeping the sharp, barbed points from tearing into its vitals with a broken knife. Finally, its opponent had it on the ground, pinned, arms held up, driving the trident down, the human's arm wavering. The Pretion looked up, lupin ears perked, to her father. The older Lick held out his tail, and the barbed stinger slowly began to extend. She seized his arm. "Father. Please. It is a mad beast, like all of its kind. Do not be fooled by its appearance. The softness of their features, the gentleness of their eyes, it is not a sign of weakness. It is a terrible trap, daughter. If you ask me to preserve this creature, you will be responsible for it. And you will regret your decision. Please." He let out a sigh, and withdrew the stinger, his chitinous arms crossed. The gladiator stepped back from the wounded human, and the mad beast was left to crawl his way back to his cage, in the depths of the Colosseum. Tick ran, grabbing a tube of the nanomedical paste from the first aid kit in her father's private viewing box as she did. When she approached the cage, she paused. The human sat within, breathing hard, its eyes dull and glossy. It was tall, its arms bulging, white scar tissue criss-crossing every inch of his skin. He looked up, sharply. "I'm here to help," she murmured softly, in the clicking language of her people. She was very surprised when the human replied, "Why?" Its lickwise was curious. Without mandibles, it had to imitate the sounds with lips and tongue, giving it a lyrical, gentle, soft sound, so at odds with its brutality in the ring. My father does not wish you for a gladiator anymore. He was willing to let me take care of you. Can I enter? It shrugged, and she unlocked the cage. She stepped nervously, uncertainly, in front of the human. It could have killed her, she knew. Even wounded, even nearly unconscious, it was dangerous. But it didn't move. She began to gently smear the paste across the creature's wounds, the flesh knitting shut, his skin losing its deathly pallor as the bone marrow was stimulated into replacing the lost blood. She smiled up at him. How did you wind up here? She asked, softly. Ship was attacked. I was the only one who survived. They gassed me, brought me here. He frowned. Why are you talking to me? Do you want me to stop? She asked, softly, uncertainty clear in her voice. It was hard to not be nervous around the human. He seemed to consider the question for a few seconds. Then he shook his head. No. It's nice. Her father, naturally, wasn't pleased with the idea of her taking in the human, but she put her foot down on the matter, and he had no choice but to capitulate to his beloved daughter, grumbling all the while. The next couple of years passed without notable incident. There had been the occasional riot among the lower classes, but even those quieted. It was a remarkably prosperous time for HFY. Do you want your freedom? She asked, one day, softly. Your father would never grant it, he said, as they sat in the garden. The delicate spray of water filled the air, nourishing the soothing black jungle, full of the plants of the Lick's native home, providing oxygen enough that each breath was deep and nourishing. There is no point in desiring what you cannot have. I had little even before I was captured. I lived life from day to day, surviving on scraps. I never had anything I was good at. That's. She frowned. I saw you fight. You couldn't have become a mercenary? A soldier? My eyes, he said, tapping his head. I have poor focus. Could never afford the treatments to fix it. Very little combat takes place at short range today. I'm not good for anything but those kinds of exhibitions. She nodded slowly. When I'm queen, I'll free you. I could even have your vision repaired. You could go out into the galaxy. It won't be long, now. Father's health is failing. Her carapace clattered as she hung her head, the pain at the thought filling her. She was surprised when the large human bent forward and very gently rested his arms around her, squeezing her softly. And yet, it was comforting. The revolution came suddenly and without warning. Violence erupting in a dozen cities at once, coordinated well. Before the orbital garrison could regain control, subversive elements within the military had beheaded the command structure, leaving the orbital defenses of HFY in disarray. Her father's leadership fell in a day, as the rebels stormed the palace. She fled through the palace, and could only think of one place to go. She entered the mad beast's room, and it looked up, head tilted in curiosity. What's happening? He asked, in his soft, lyrical lickwise. Rebels. My father's dead. They're coming for me. They were provocateurs, from the paratite, they. She sobbed softly, and covered her eyes. Everyone's dead, the captain of the guards, the staff, they're killing everyone. She stiffened, as there was a rattling sound of gunfire from the corridor outside. The mad beast stood up straight, and pointed towards the closet, slatted black wood hiding its few meager positions. There. She nodded, and ran into the closet, settling down against the back wall, staring through the slats, her chitin blending in with the surroundings. Then the door slammed open. Half a dozen of the Lick rebels, the short and brutal rifles of the paratites in their chitinous claws, the red cloaks of the rebellion around them. They came up short when they saw the mad beast, sitting silently on the bed, a book in hand. He looked up slowly. "Peace, brother," said one of the Paratides. "Freedom has come for all of the slaves of the king. We are cutting the corruption out at the root. Join us, and you will be free. Do you know where the girl is?" She watched, her valves sinking in her chest, as the human raised a finger and pointed, silently, at the closet. She watched as they approached, and sank back against the wall, hopelessness filling her, as they threw open the doors, leveling their rifles. "Thus always to tyrants," hissed the one in the lead. He never even saw the knife coming, as it sank into the back of his neck. From a distance, they would have killed him instantly. Up close, clustered around the closet, they were no match. 6 red cloaks lay spattered with white ichor on the ground. The human chose 2 that were the least blood-stained, and placed one around Tick. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her eyes wide. "You saved me. You could have been free. Could have escaped, you didn't have to risk yourself." "Yes, I did. You saved my life. I couldn't let you die." She felt slightly shaken. She had saved the human's life. It had been a passing fancy. It had cost her relatively little. She had begged her father not to let him die, and used a bit of freely available medical paste to heal his wounds. If she'd been asked to face down 6 gun-wielding rebels to do it, she could not bring herself to believe that she would ever be able to risk her life so willingly. It left her shaken and inexplicably guilty. The human moved like a shadow through the castle, clearing the way for her. Soon, they were at the small private spaceport belonging to the king. Not long after that, the ship's engine was humming as they ascended into the sky. "I never asked," she said, as the string drive fired up and the stars elongated into long points of light. "Your name?" "I've always known you as the Mad Beast?" "It's all right. I actually liked that nickname. It's much better than my real name. Still, I'd like to know." He frowned. "If you knew it, you might not respect me. You have to promise not to laugh." "I swear." "Wilbert." The hold of the ship echoed with the raucous clicking laughter of Lickwise for several minutes, as the human's ears grew red. But in fairness, the only thing she'd been wearing when she'd run into his room was her sheer Wilbert.